The Austin-Healey Sprite is a small open sports car that was announced to the press in Monte Carlo by BMC on May 20, 1958, just before that year's Monaco Grand Prix. It was intended to be a low-cost model that a chap could keep in his bike shed, yet be the successor to the sporting versions of the pre-war Austin 7. The Sprite was designed by the Donald Healey Motor Company, with production being undertaken by Austin-Healey. It first went on sale at a price of £669, using a tuned version of the Austin A-Series engine and as many other components from existing cars as possible to keep costs down. The Sprite was made at the MG Sports Car Factory at Abingdon, and it was inevitable that the success of the design would spawn an milligram version known as the Midget, reviving a popular pre-war model name. Enthusiasts often refer to Sprites and MG Midgets collectively as Spridgets. Mark I, the Little Sprite, quickly became affectionately known as the Fridge Eye in the UK and the Bug Eye in the US, because its headlights were prominently mounted on top of the bonnet, inboard of the front wings. The car's designers had intended that the headlights could be retracted, with the lenses facing skyward when not in use. A similar arrangement was used many years later on the Porsche 928. But cost-cutting by BMC led to the flip-up mechanism being deleted, therefore the headlights were simply fixed in a permanently upright position, giving the car its most distinctive feature. The body was styled by Jerry Coker, with subsequent alterations by Les Ireland following Coker's emigration to the US in 1957. The car's distinctive frontal styling bore a strong resemblance to the defunct American 1951 Crossley Super Sport. 48,987 Fridge Sprites were made. The problem of providing a rigid structure to an open-topped sports car was resolved by Barry Bilby, Healey's chassis designer, who adapted the idea provided by the Jaguar D-Type, with rear suspension forces routed through the body shell's floor pan. The Sprite's chassis design was the world's first volume production sports car to use unitary construction, where the sheet metal body panels take many of the structural stresses. The original metal gauge of the rear structure specified by Bilby was reduced by the Austin Design Office during prototype build. However, during testing at MIRA, distortion and deformation of the rear structure occurred and the original specification was reinstated. The two front chassis legs projecting forward from the passenger compartment mean the shell is not a full monocoque. The front sheet metal assembly, including the bonnet and wings, was a one-piece unit, hinged from the back, that swung up to allow access to the engine compartment. The 43 bhp, 948 cc's OHV engine was derived from the Austin A35 and Morris Minor 1000 models, also BMC products, but upgraded with twin 11 and 8-inch SU carburetors. The rack and pinion steering was derived from the Morris Minor 1000 and the front suspension from the Austin A35. The front suspension was a coil spring and wishbone arrangement, with the arm of the Armstrong lever shock absorber serving as the top suspension link. The rear axle was both located and sprung by quarter-elliptic leaf springs, again with lever arm shock absorbers and top links. There were no exterior door handles. The driver and passenger were required to reach inside to open the door. There was also no boot lid, owing to the need to retain as much structural integrity as possible, and access to the spare wheel and luggage compartment was achieved by tilting the seat backs forward and reaching under the rear deck, a process likened to potholing by many owners, but which resulted in a large space available to store soft baggage. Engine, 1958 to Euro 1961, 948 cc's A-Series I4, 43 horsepower at 5200 rpms and 52 lb-FAFT at 3300 rpms. A car was tested by the British magazine The Motor in 1958. It had a top speed of 82.9 miles per hour and could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 20.5 seconds. Fuel consumption of 43 miles per imperial gallon was recorded. The test car cost £678, including taxes of £223. The BMC competition department entered Austin-Healey Sprites in major international races and rallies, their first major success coming when John Sprinzel and Willie Cave won their class on the 1958 Alpine Rally. Private competitors also competed with much success in Sprites. Because of its affordability and practicality, the Austin-Healey Sprite was developed into a formidable competition car, assuming many variants by John Sprinzel, Speedwell and WSM. The Sebring Sprite became the most iconic of the racing breed of Austin-Healey Sprites. Many owners use their Austin-Healey Sprites in competition today, 50 years after its introduction. Austin-Healey Sprite MKI Gallery. Mark II. The Mark II used the same 948cc engine, but with larger twin 11.4-inch SU carburetors, increasing power to 46.5 bhp. A close-ratio gearbox was fitted. The bodywork was completely revamped, with the headlights migrating to a more conventional position in the wings either side of a full-width grille. At the rear, styling borrowed from the soon-to-be-announced MGB gave a similarly more modern look, with the added advantages of an opening boot lid and conventional rear bumper bar. The result was a much less eccentric-looking sports car, though at the expense of some 100 pounds extra weight. In contrast to the Fragile, the later cars are often collectively referred to as square-bodied Sprites by enthusiasts. An milligram version of the car was introduced in May 1961 as the new Midget, reviving a model name which had been a great success for the MG car company in the 1930s. The Midget was to prove more popular with the public than the Sprite, and by 1972 had completely supplanted it within the BMC range. In October 1962, both Sprites and Midgets were given a long-stroke 1098cc engine, which was also fitted in single carburetor form to the Austin A40 and Morris Minor 1000. A strengthened gearbox with Porsche Synchromage was introduced to cope with the extra power a heady 56 bhp. Front disc brakes were also introduced at the same time and wire wheels became an option. 31,665 Mark II Sprites were made. Innocenti also produced their own version of the Sprite, using the standard production underframe, but clothed in the sharpest of Italian suits, styled by the American Tom Tjada, then working at Carrozzeria Gaia. The Innocenti 950 Spider and later 1100 Spider were produced from 1961 until 1968. A car with hardtop tested by the British magazine The Motor in 1961 had a top speed of 85.8 miles per hour and could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 20.0 seconds. A fuel consumption of 43.5 miles per imperial gallon was recorded. The test car, which was to deluxe specification, cost £705 including taxes of £208. Engines, 1961 Euro 1964, 948 cc's A Series I4, 46 horsepower at 5500 rpms and 53 lb-FAFT at 3000 rpms, 1962 Euro 1964, 1098 cc's A Series I4, 56 horsepower at 5500 rpms and 62 lb-FAFT at 3250 rpms. Mark III. The Mark III Sprite was also marketed as the Mark II MG Midget. Differences between the two were again restricted to minor trim detailing. Although still 1098 cc's, the engine had a stronger block casting, and the size of the crankshaft main bearings was increased to 2 inches. A new curved glass windscreen was introduced with hinged quarter lights and wind-up side windows. Exterior door handles were provided for the first time, with separate door locks. Though the car could now be secured, with a soft top roof, the added protection was limited. The rear suspension was modified from quarter-elliptic to semi-elliptic leaf springs, which gave a more comfortable ride for a near-negligible weight penalty, as well as providing additional axle location, the upper links fitted to the quarter-elliptic models being deleted. Though scarcely sybaritic, these changes helped the Sprite and Midget compete with the recently released Triumph Spitfire. 25,905 Mark III Sprites were made. Engine, 1964 Euro 66, 1098 cc's A Series I4, 59 horsepower at 5750 rpms and 65 lb-FAFT at 3500 rpms. Mark IV and Austin Sprite. The next upgrade was presented at the London Motor Show in October 1966. Besides receiving the larger 1275cc engine, The Mark IV and its cousin the Mark III MG Midget had several changes which were more than cosmetic. Most notable is the change from a removable convertible top, which had to be stowed in the boot, to a permanently affixed, folding top of greatly improved design, which was much easier to use. Separate brake and clutch master cylinders were fitted, as car manufacturers' thoughts began to turn to making their product safer. On U.S. market versions, the larger engine sacrificed some of its performance from 1968 on, through the use of smog pumps and other modifications to comply with federal emission control requirements. 1969 was the final year the Sprite was exported to the U.S. For the 1970 model year, cast alloy wheels were fitted and the grille was changed to resemble that fitted to the MG Midget. 22,790 Mark IV Sprites were made. Engine, 1966 a Euro 1971, 1275 cc's A Series I4, 65 horsepower at 6,000 rpms and 72 lb-FAFT at 3,000 rpms. The Healey connection was discontinued in 1971, so the final 1,022 Sprites built were simply Austin Sprites. This was a cost-cutting move of Donald Stokes, enabling British Leyland to stop paying royalties to the Donald Healey Motor Company. There was no direct successor, as BL's extensive range already contained the MG Midget, which was identical to the Sprite except for badging, and the similarly dimensioned and priced Triumph Spitfire. Competition. The Sprite have been successful club-level race cars since their launch and continue to race in various events to the present day. International events were entered throughout the 1960s and surprisingly good results were achieved, including a 12th place finish at Le Mans in 1965. The works cars began with use of a commercially available fiberglass-bodied Sprite before utilizing lightweight body panels of standard appearance. By the mid-60s, use was made of the wind tunnel at Longbridge. Barry Bilby utilized the results to produce a streamlined body, built in Burma bright alloy at Healey's Warwick workshops by Bill Buckingham and Terry Westwood. These cars were powered by BMC's Courthouse Greens tuned engines and eventually produced a reliable 110 bhp, which enabled a top speed of around 150 miles per hour on the Mulsanne Straight. One-off gearboxes were also made at Courthouse Green, with MGB gearboxes modified with an externally mounted fifth gear and overdrive in some cases. BMC Works entries recorded class wins at Sebring with drivers including Sterling Moss, Bruce McLaren and Steve McQueen, as well as competing in the Targa Florio and Mugello sports car races. Australian production, Sprites were imported into Australia in completely knockdown kit form and assembled by the Pressed Metal Corporation at Enfield, in New South Wales. Models assembled in Australia included the MK1, 2, 2A, 3 and 3A. Innocenti Spider and C Cooper copyright. At the 1962 Renault Auto Show, BMC's Italian partner Innocenti showed an attractive little Spider built upon Sprite underpinnings. The car was the first design of Tom Tjada's, drawn for Carrozzeria Gaia. Gaia's partner firm OSI built the body shells, when the car entered production in early 1961. The original Innocenti 950 Spider had the Fragile 948cc engine with 43 horsepower, 624 of these were built. Later in 1961 an uprated 46.5 horsepower was installed. In February 1963 the 1098cc's S model was introduced, this also had front disc brakes to cope with the extra power. The 1100 has 58 horsepower and could also be fitted with a removable hardtop. The Spider wasn't a mere reshelling, as the entire bulkhead was moved forward to provide longer doors and a more modern look. Unlike the Spartan Fragile, the Spider also had wind-up windows and a permanent windscreen. 4,790 of the 950 Spiders were built, and 2,074 of the 1100cc Spiders. The Innocenti Spider originally sold well in Italy, with production running at 13 cars per day in 1962, but it had a hard time competing against the cheaper Sprite in export markets. As more modern competitors arrived and as the British-built Sprite was modernized, sales dropped precipitously, with only 63 cars built in 1965. Thus, Innocenti presented the reworked Innocenti Cooper copyright in September 1966, still with the same 1100 engine as seen in late Spiders. The badging on the car simply read Innocenti C. The Cooper Copyright S all-new bodywork was wider and longer than the Spiders, and the wheelbase was extended by 150 mm to 2180 mm. The floorpan was reworked to allow for the seats to be mounted lower than in a Sprite, making the cabin less cramped. It was competitively priced in the Italian market, slotting nicely between the smaller Fiat 850 Cooper Copyright and the bigger Fiat 124 Sport Spider. Only 794 were built when production ended in 1968. Lenham GT Coupe. The Lenham Motor Company of Kent, founded in 1960, was, and still is, one of the once many cottage industry automotive companies providing specialist conversions based upon commercial brand platforms. Best known for its Spridget Cooper copyright conversions and the big Healey-based Lenham Healey, the firm also produced hardtops for Jaguar E-Types, Triumphs, the Jensen Healey, the Lotus Elan and for the MGB. UK 50th Anniversary Celebration. On May 24, 2008, the official UK golden anniversary of the introduction of the Austin-Healey Sprite, Spridget 50 €. The big party was held at the British Heritage Motor Centre at Gaydon, Warwickshire. Up to 1,000 Sprites, Midgets and derivatives were in attendance, a record number. The event was jointly organised and promoted by the UK's Midget and Sprite Club, Healey Drivers Club, MG Owners Club, Austin-Healey Club and MG Car Club. The first time an event of this size has been supported by all of the marque representing clubs. References. Further reading. External links. Austin Memories, a History of Austin and Longbridge. Photographic database of UK registered MK1 Sprites, a UK registered for AGI images plus period adverts in press articles.